Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us for this live webinar. Subject today is going to be how to buy or sell a dental practice without using a dental broker. Very important subject. It's at the foundation of why we started this Facebook group, Dental Practice Matchmaker. And so we thought that it would be good to have an informative meeting, figure out how this process is done. It's not as daunting as you may think. Joining me today, we've got a panel of real live dentists who they've gone through this process of buying or selling without a broker. And with that being said, I'll go ahead and introduce them. We have Dr. Keon from New Mexico. We have Dr. Lance Pietro up in Pennsylvania. And side note, it was his post about a week ago that actually inspired this. He made a post on Facebook wanting a webinar like this, and that's what got it organized. So props to him for that. We also have Dr. Delaney Spalding in Alabama. And we also have Dr. Bridget Jorgensen, the founder of Dental Practice Matchmaker, and she is also, she's from Atlanta, currently in Alabama though. So that is our panel. We are going to have two other people be joining us later, Dr. Andrew Klingen in Alabama, as well as Amber Masters, who's an attorney, I believe in Oklahoma, and they're going to go through the experience as well. So before we begin, going around and hearing what everyone's process was, buying, selling, and kind of the things to look out for, the things to know. We're going to go through a brief presentation just on what this process actually looks like. We have a PDF. I'm going to go and share that on the screen. Okay, you should be seeing my screen right here. So if you have no experience whatsoever with the dental transition, with how this process works, going without a broker, we've kind of broken it down. Won't take too much of your time on this, but I just wanted to go through this for some of the newer dentists. And by the way, people that are writing their comments both on Facebook, on our member website, as well as directly here in StreamYard, we will be getting to all of your questions. So just keep coming. So brokerless transitions, here's conversations with people that have done it. There are 4 things required when you are buying, selling a dental practice without a broker. There's 4 things that you have to have: a dental practice, a seller who's willing, a willing and capable buyer. This does not mean no debt. This does not mean perfect. It just means that they are a willing buyer that can do most procedures the selling doc is doing and is willing to learn some of the things that maybe they don't know yet. Number 4, something you absolutely do need to have is an attorney, a lawyer. Usually you're going to need one for both the buyer and the seller. And this person is going to be instrumental in writing up the actual sale contract for the practice. Now, other things that are almost certainly going to be involved in your transition is going to be an accountant. You're going to need a CPA, ideally one that has a CPA certification, Certified Valuation Analyst. This is a good way to get to your price of what you guys are going to be buying and selling for, and just someone that's needed in the process. 1 second here, adding in someone else. Hello, Amber Masters. Oh, and we've also got Dr. Klingen. So now the entire panel is here. Again, Amber Masters is an attorney. I believe you're in Oklahoma. Is that correct?
Arizona, but also barred in Oklahoma.
Okay, gotcha. And then Dr. Klingen is still getting onto the webcam, but he's in Alabama. So back to our little presentation here. You're going to need an accountant, almost certainly. You're going to need a banker, probably. So this is the person that's going to loan the money to buy the practice. Yeah, you're going to definitely need to get involved with one of these. Now, so absolutely required is going to be seller and practice, a buyer, and a lawyer. Nowhere in there do you need a broker. That is very much a thing of the past. In the age of social media, in the age of the internet, we strongly believe that it is not necessary to involve a broker in the process, whether you're buying or you're selling. Save yourself a lot of money, save yourself a lot of stress from people's experiences with working with brokers. So contract fee is typically, when you're going through the lawyer, it's going to be about $5,000 to $10,000. And these are the 3 things that are, probably going to be necessary in your conversation: an accountant, a banker, and a landlord if the seller does not own the actual property. So that is, some information on the actual transition aspect. After you've made the purchase, you're going to need marketing, more equipment, different team. These are all questions you're going to have to figure out the answer to over time. It's a long process, but you will get there. But that is the long and short of everything involved in buying and selling a practice. We are going to be publishing this PDF, so if you want to download it, take a look at it. I will send that over. Now, I'm going to pass it along to the people that have actually done this process. They have gone through and actually completed transitions without a broker, and we're going to hear from them. So leading off, we're going to have Dr. Bridget Jorgensen, who sold her practice back, I believe, in 2018 without a broker. So I'm going to let her go ahead and take it away.
I am Bridget Jorgensen. I'm the creator of the group that you guys are watching this on, Dental Practice Matchmaker. This did not exist when I wanted to sell my practice, so I had to do a lot more work to find a willing buyer. So decided to do things a little bit differently. I sold my practice in 2018, but I started the practice about 3 years earlier. My husband had sold Lighthouse 360, which is a dental communications company. He was done, and he's like, okay, you don't need to be tied to the practice anymore. We need to travel. We need to do a lot of fun stuff, which I wanted to do. But, instantaneously selling your practice is not so easy. But we contacted a broker. There was a dental broker that their office was about 5 miles from our practice. So thought it would be a very easy, simple situation. It was not. I had, they came to us, they looked at the practice, they said, it's great. Your production's a little bit high for a one person to take this on, and yet not big enough for two people. So it may or may not be easy to sell, but it looked gorgeous. We had a brand new building. We had 8-year-old equipment because we moved to this building 8 years previously. Very nicely decorated. We had great team members. We were or actually out of network, not fee for service, but out of network practice. So great practice. We turned all of our information over to them. Like, we're very good bookkeepers, and my husband is, and sent them a ton of information. When they got back to us with their little packet of information saying that this is what they're going to be giving out to other people, it was not accurate. And we didn't know why, but they basically said, well, we have to fit the parameters of what people want. So we've changed your numbers a little bit. And I was like, but that's not accurate. And they said, well, this is the way it's done in the dental world. So still didn't feel right, but I'm like, okay, we've never done this before. I have no idea what we're doing. So we had 3 offers in a week. And none of them, 2 people were just out of school. Now, this is a very high producing practice. Fee for service patients require a lot of hand holding. 2 of the people were straight out of school. And then one person we ended up finding out had some board issues, which of course the broker did not tell me. But, these are patients that I'd have for 20 years. There's no way I'm going to sell my practice to somebody that's done some unethical stuff in the back. So we told them, never mind. We paid them $5,000 for that privilege of telling them never mind, and set about finding a different way to do things. So the next thing we did, my whole practice, my whole team knew everything that we were doing. They helped me create a letter. We hand addressed letters to 700 people. So it was people, you can't do this on the Georgia board anymore, but at the time I could pick people who had gotten their license between 3 and 8 years ago. And then we're in Metro Atlanta. So I basically picked 50 miles outside of it, or not just outside, but 50 miles, including Atlanta, and sent it out to those people that fit that criterion. It was about 700 people. We got several people interested. I met with some of them. I took one out to lunch and loved her, and she never called me back, and I was devastated. And then we talked to the other people, and I didn't find anybody that I was willing to sell my practice to. So I thought, maybe I'll call her back. Well, the first time I had taken her to lunch, she had not seen the practice. And we were pretty adamant that we weren't offering like a guaranteed salary, because we'd had associates before and we knew how much money they made, and we told her how much money she would make, but it's hard. She didn't believe us. So those were the 2 things I did wrong. I did not have her come see the office, and I didn't offer her a guaranteed salary. Now, she ended up taking the job later, but when she came in to see the office, she realized that we had on-site childcare, and she was pregnant but hadn't told me. So that was a big deal to her. So she ended up starting pretty much within the next month, and she didn't want to give up her old job because she didn't know if this was going to work out. So she worked 5 days one week and 4 days the next week. So on her 5th day on the second week, which was only once every other week for us, she worked for us until her pregnancy was over. She had the baby. When she came back from maternity leave, she came back to us. I went down to 2 days. She worked 3 days, and we did that for the next year or so. Gave her a chance to know all the patients, know all the equipment. Alan talked to her husband about all the, like, he was going to be her office manager. So he came in, went through all the profit and loss, all that type of stuff. I included her when we were firing someone or hiring someone. So that went on for like a year or so. And then her practice loan went through, and I still work there. It is 6 years. All we did was flip the associate contract. And so I work about 2 days a month, and whenever she wants to go on vacation. She's going on a Disney cruise in July, and so I'm going to cover for her for that whole week. So it has been a phenomenal transition, but it's because we controlled everything. You know, when I first signed my contract with her, I'm like, well, I'm only doing this for 6 months, because if it's awful, I want a quick way out. And it was not awful, and we've not talked about that contract since then, because it has gone so well. So that is my story. And that's also kind of why I created this whole group, because there's no need to put a broker in the middle of everything. There should be the 2 dentists, and figure it all with accountants and lawyers, and that's all you need. That's my story.
Thank you so much for telling us your story. Now we're going to go on the other side of things with a buyer experience. We have Dr. Keon in New Mexico, who is going to tell us a little bit about what his experience was like with buying a practice.
Hey guys, so I was working as an associate. Actually, I was working at a FQHC after I finished residency. Suddenly realized I really needed to pay off my loans, and was like, how do I do that? And was like, I need to go ahead and start a practice or do something like that. I initially was talking to a friend of mine who was working for a practice on somewhere else in the state, and they were like, I didn't know anything about any practice, and I had someone that I was working with at the time who also wanted to do the same thing, and so we were like, well, maybe we partner together. We kind of didn't know what we were doing, and we're like, really found this like idea of owning a practice super daunting, and we're just like, oh my gosh, like it's like one of those things you sometimes don't know what you don't know, and so we just thought, like, how could we possibly own a practice? It's like not possible. We don't know anything about it, all this stuff, and so a lot of like, okay, we need to find something else. And my friend was like, oh, I was talking to my boss, and he wants to franchise their practices, and I was like, oh, cool, let's meet with them. And after meeting with them, I was like, this, I don't know what I don't know, and they were like, oh yeah, we'll take care of all the management. This would be great, and like a DSO kind of thing. And ended up getting dinner with a friend of mine who was like, no, don't do that. That's really stupid. You basically like doing all the work, and they're going to take a cut forever. Go start your own practice. I'm like, I don't know how to do that. He's like, just go meet with every dentist where you want to live, and who's like over a certain age. And he said 50. Not that 50 is old or anything, but over 50, and just walk in the door and introduce yourself and try to meet privately with them. And so I literally the next day did that. And I literally looked up, I just sat there and made a giant list of every dentist within like 100 miles, and wrote up a little like small like basically letter, like introducing myself but not putting my intentions on there or anything like that. And then just literally went and sat in offices, waiting rooms, and kind of like literally like half of them just sitting in the waiting room. I was like, I'm not buying this practice. It was enough just spending 10 minutes, and then I was like, yeah, this isn't where I'm going to be. And literally almost every single person I met with was like, I didn't know how people would react. Was surprised that almost every dentist I met with was super receptive. I think dentists, me, myself included, have a big ego, and if you walk in and they're like, "Oh, I think your practice is great and I want to buy it," they're like, "Oh my gosh," like, So, but so I ended up narrowing it down to like 5 offices, that I was like, they kind of like, and then started looking at, and then at that point called a buddy of mine. He's like, "You need an accountant, you need to get a lawyer," and so did those things, and then the accountant really started kind of helping us look through these practices. None of these practices were evaluated. We never got evaluations on any of them. I did my own evaluation with my accountant, and pretty much um, took the approach of, I'm gonna pay what I'm gonna pay, and negotiate. So kind of the things I was really looking at as a, in as a potential practice owner, they talk about like, you know, I think there's a lot of good stuff you can see on a practice. You can see their collections and all these things. I think those are important. Obviously, learning how to read a P&L, and I'll give you some advice that I took. I did um, up to this point. I, for about a year, had signed up with a couple practice brokers, and not in my region, but like all over different areas, like in Colorado, Arizona, Texas. And I basically was like, any practice come for sale, I would like to sign a non-disclosure, and I want to read it. I want to read about it. And so I literally read through probably 100 different profit and loss statements, 100 different practice evaluations, from tons of different brokers. What I found is almost every broker I saw basically just copy and pasted it in. I mean, just being honest, like I signed up with like 5 brokers, and every single broker, every practice was like riddled with like mistakes where they forgot to like control find the right name and all these things. And so, but in doing so, I kind of realized, okay, so pretty much these like practice evaluations I was looking at were like not, in my opinion, like super meaningful. It was like you see a practice in Dallas and then a practice in like, you know, uh, I don't know, some rural town in Colorado, and somehow they have the exact same practice, like evaluation matrix, which made no sense to me. So I started kind of looking at these things and being like, okay, so more importantly, I need to understand how to read a P&L. I need to start looking at other factors like, what do I want to do in this practice? What does it look like? And so things that I started really paying attention to, and maybe because my mom is a real estate agent, was the old saying is like location, location, location. I would add to that, it's location, 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 parking. Um, Parking, I think, is super critical, and I can talk about that in a second. But like, really started looking at these practices, narrowed it down to 2 that I thought had a really good like opportunity to grow, space wise. They did parking, and then just sat down with both of the guys and was like, "Hey, just so you know, I'm talking to another person, and use that to my advantage." Got a really ridiculously good price. One of the guys was actually the youngest of the entire group, and his wife just wanted to move close to grandbabies. She just had they just had their like 3rd grandchild, and they were like, she just grandbaby fever, wanted to be there, and so she was just like, whatever it is, we're out, we're good. And so we he didn't stay out at all. We bought it. It was kind of crazy. We bought it and like flipped all 3,000 feet in like like month and a half, 2 months. It was kind of crazy. I quit my job and basically like helped the contractor like flip this practice, which was crazy because my wife was pregnant, and I don't know, we had no income, and so it was very motivating to get that done. Um, but yeah, so we bought it and have since, it's 2 doctors bought it together, and we thought that was a little crazy too, but we thought there was a good potential in our area, and uh, since we bought it, have grown it from um, 700,000 in collections to over almost 6 million last year. Um, and so, but a big part of that is the fact that we have amazing parking. Our parking is awesome, minus the fact that my staff, I have to rent parking from someone else. So that's, again, the parking is a huge thing. Patients literally say, like, tell us all the time, they're like, your parking is so nice. And I don't know, I never really paid attention to it, but it is just easy for older patients. They don't have to like, it's not on a shopping center or anything like that. But that was kind of my experience. And the way I ended up negotiating with the guy was just basically saying, this is what I want to pay. And he said, this is what I want. And we just went back and forth until we like found like an amicable price. And it was a good deal. He ended up financing the building and the practice, owner financing it. So even better perk. And since then have bought charts from other practices and stuff. Again, no broker involved. All those guys were guys that I had contacted and was like, I want to buy your practice, and then ended up not, and had kept a good relationship with them. And then when they were ready to retire, we just kind of purchased their practices through their charts. And it's worked out well for us. So I don't think that a broker is necessary. I think it can be uncomfortable for some of us to like negotiate, and I think especially in a digital world, we all like want to avoid any kind of conflict, and we don't, all these things. But I think it's totally reasonable to like talk to an accountant, look at the numbers, and say, okay, like this is how much I would be making if I buy this practice. This is how much it's worth to me, and figure a number out there. So I think it's a lot easier than biochemistry.
Thank you so much for sharing your story on your buying experience. We're going to go to another buyer. He's in Pennsylvania. He is in the dark down there. See him right in the middle, Dr. Lance Pietropola. Lance's post a week ago is what inspired this webinar. So we would love to hear from him and what his experience was like buying in Pennsylvania.
Hi, sorry, I'm in the middle of driving. I'm almost home. My daughter's driving, I should say. But yeah, good evening. I am from York, Pennsylvania. Basically trying to summarize my story. I kind of did a similar thing as the previous buyer. I sent out a bunch of letters and actually started practicing in the county next to York, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and just didn't get any hits. I got really frustrated with the whole associateship. I kind of was targeting a lot of fee-for-service practices right out of school. I had a lot of advanced training, having done a VA GPR, and I really wanted to do like implants and stuff. And so I was going into a lot of these higher end practices. And what I found is they just weren't busy enough to accommodate an associate. And so I probably had 3 or 4 associateships my first 3 years out, got frustrated with the whole process. And I was working 1 day a week at the VA near me. And then the VA brought me on full time. And I just thought I'd just park my butt there for a few years so I could find a practice to buy. I looked at like 20 some practices and kicked a lot of tires. A lot of dentists aren't good business people. You need a good team around you. I had a good accountant who was dental, background, and so looked at a lot of stuff and just kind of cursory. I left the VA for a group practice for a guy that was disabled to join the other 2 dentists. I was there about a year, and we just couldn't get the business end of things structured. I always wanted to be in a group practice, but I just found it kind of frustrating, and the business part of it was not well done and wasn't structured how the partners get in and out. And so my accountant actually kind of discouraged me from signing anything with them, and we left on good terms. In the meantime, a family member put me in contact with a dentist in York who, I looked at his practice. We actually met a couple years before, and I just stopped at his office in passing because like my family member put us in contact with each other. So we had lunch, and very nice guy. His practice was an absolute dump. I was like appalled that shag carpet, there's like duct tape on the chairs or whatever. And like just didn't think anything of it. And then I was pretty desperate when I was in this group practice that was kind of not working out, and came back to him like 3 years after we met. And I was like, what's your situation? And he's like, actually, I just had it evaluated and was going to put it on the market. But if you're interested, we'll just wipe off the broker's fee. I won't list it, and we'll kind of do it without him. And there are some issues, I think he thought, setting up the associateship contract was hard with him. I just think he had unrealistic expectations as far as like what the pay was. And I gave a lot just because his overhead was like crazy low. I think the practice was doing like 900,000 when I bought it, and his overhead was like 34%, which was like crazy. And my accountant said I'd be stupid not to buy it, even if the whole office was put together with duct tape. He's like, you gotta, like, this is a good opportunity. and it was very heavy PPO. I've morphed it into something that was more along my vision over the last 12 years. The building next to me came up for sale about 4 years ago. So we renovated that while we were still working. He was 3 chairs. I was able to expand to 5 chairs and take my office out. But we just had, like the other speaker was saying, parking's huge. We had horrible parking at my other office. And that was one of the biggest bottlenecking issues that I had, not so much chair space, but parking. And especially when you account for staff parking. I was lucky I had 2 staff members that walked to the office. So there was 2 cars that weren't hogging up the parking spot, but that was something I really didn't even think about before I bought a practice. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much my story. We did it without the broker. In fact, I think the broker, the little that he talked to the seller, I think he put some seeds in the sellers that were unrealistic. And so I think brokers sometimes can even actually work against you. And I mean, you got to think too that they're getting paid on a percentage. So their goal is not just to get the deal done, but to get the most amount of money for the practice, which is not in the buyer's best interest. I don't, some of these groups, and I won't name names, but they claim to represent the buyer and the seller, which I think is absolutely bogus. I would never use somebody like that. And make sure you have your own team of people, particularly a dental CPA and a good attorney who has done other dental jobs or transitions. That was kind of a lifesaver, because we got to a point where it's like there's some really big sticking points as far as the associateship contract and the accounts receivable that I think if I didn't have a good dental attorney, the deal probably would have fell through. But we did it pretty quick. I mean, everything was done in a matter of 2 months, and I started working, and he cut to 2 days a week, and he worked for me for 2.5 years, which wasn't part of the plan, but we renegotiated after 6 months, and it worked out really well, and I'm pleased with everything, as far as doing it without a broker.
Great to hear from you. And speaking of attorneys, we have Mrs. Amber Masters. She is with us as well, and I believe she has experience working with several people as they were selling or buying. She can tell us a little bit more, so I'll let her take it away.
Great. Thank you. Yes, I'm Amber Masters. So I represent dentists. I am a dental attorney. I appreciate Lance's comments on how important dental attorneys and also CPAs are throughout this process if you're not using a broker. I've been practicing for about 10 years, helping dentists through such transitions. And also my husband is a dentist, and we purchased a practice ourselves without a broker. So I can actually attest on many fronts that it can be done. I'm coming in with a few points of how to do it. How do you actually find the practice for sale, or how do you list your practice for sale without a broker? So my first point, and it's been harped on already, is to find an accountant or a dental specific lawyer who has connections, who might know people who are willing to sell. So what we did in the purchase of mine and my husband's practice, I should say my husband's practice. We're in a community property state, so I guess I get half of it, but it's really his practice. How we did it was I started reaching out to dental specific accountants in the area we wanted to live, so in Arizona. And I called 3 or 4 and asked if they had any clients who might be willing to sell within the next couple of years. And within 90 days, we were closing on our practice of having that phone call. So accountants are very, very valuable in this sense, not just in knowing what practices are going to be coming up for sale before they might sign with a broker, but also the deep nitty gritty insights into the practice itself. So if they're actually representing the person that you buy from, they'll have all of the practice's financial history, which is really valuable. They'll be able to help you after the close of the practice if you're doing things like payroll and things like that with them. Very helpful. So a dental specific accountant, I think, is probably the number one thing I would look for. And then there's people like me, attorneys, who are very well connected with dentists in the area that you might be looking for. And so I typically get reached out to when a client is about to sell or is in the process of selling. And I often connect people just like I was connected with our practice. Let's see. The second thing I was going to say, so CPAs and accountants, the second way you could you could sell or buy a practice is social media, and in a couple different ways. So you might find a Facebook group just like this one where you might be connected with someone. There's lots of groups I'm a part of, like spouses of dentists. Those are like the best groups. If you have a spouse, definitely get them into a spouse's dental group of some kind. Those are very, very helpful. Those ladies really connect. Well, that was so sexist. They might not be ladies, they might be men too, but they are really good at like making those connections. There might be dental groups by geographic location where you want to practice, and you could reach out in those groups, or alumni groups are great for this as well. And then on the opposite end, you might shout out something on your social media that you're looking to buy. Be really careful if you do that, that you're not like making your employer catch wind that you might be leaving soon, or if you own a practice and you're looking to buy another one, you don't want patients, or if you're selling, you don't want patients catching wind too soon that you're headed out. The other way I would say, so CPAs and attorneys, social media, and then word of mouth. If you just start telling people, all the people that you know that you're looking to buy or you're looking to sell, you might be surprised. That's probably, I don't know, maybe 30% or so of the practices I help with, it was just word of mouth. A brother, a cousin, an uncle told someone, and they told someone, and they were able to connect that way. So that's number 3, word of mouth. Number 4, attending local dental events. So a lot of referring offices will throw events where you can network. So they'll have like a dentist appreciation night. Same with financial advisors. I get invited to, I don't know, 5 or 6 of these a year, where financial advisors will throw these events specifically for dentists, trying to, of course, to get the dentist business. But it's a great place to network with other dentists who might be looking to buy or sell. I love what was mentioned a couple of times with kind of the cold calling of dentists in the area. I like that because it's bold, and a dentist who might be on the fence or getting ready to sell would leap at that. But rather than cold calling, or not rather than, but maybe in addition to, you could also try warm intros. So targeting a dentist or a handful, or I think someone said like 100 dentists. I was really impressed. But targeting dentists that you think might be retiring soon, and just start asking people if they know him or her, and get a warm introduction to them, take them to lunch, something like that. It might be someone within their patient base or another dentist. Somebody knows them. And if you can get a warm intro, that is usually very helpful, in addition to the cold calling or cold reaching out through letters and things like that. Another way to do it would be to find some sort of niche group. So not necessarily like a Facebook or a social media group, but like your school alumni group or your state's dental association. Those can often connect you as well. So I kind of touched on my experience. I called a few accountants. Like I said, we found a seller. I'm going to tell you a few things while I've got you here to watch out for when you don't have a broker, because in my experience, I think actually brokers this was kind of touched on before too, but I think they can cause more problems than just taking money from the sale, but they can like cause legal issues. Bridget mentioned, some misrepresentations that her broker made. I have a client recently who was basically not paid about $20,000. They should have been paid. It can get really messy with brokers. But that said, they do a couple of useful things. And one of the most useful things they do, because it's in their benefit, is that they help facilitate the close of the transaction. So I sometimes get clients, because so many of my clients are not represented by brokers, I get them where the selling dentist is just dragging their feet, getting things done so that the parties can close. And that's probably the number one frustration, is it can take a lot longer because you don't have someone that's like, let's close this, and kind of bugging you to get it done. Unless, of course, you're both represented by attorneys, which hopefully you are, and attorneys can be really annoying too in helping to close things. But just be aware that you don't have anybody involved in the transaction that has a real punch to like get the sale closed other than the buyer. So or sometimes the seller. So just keep that in mind that you might need to help facilitate that, or you might need to be represented by someone who can help facilitate that for you. The other thing I was going to mention is like what to watch out for when you don't have a broker is a proper practice valuation. So I love that this was mentioned earlier. A practice is really worth whatever you're willing to pay for it. And if you understand the financial statements, if you've had everything looked over by a CPA, they can help you value the practice. Don't just pick a number out of thin air and hope a bank is going to loan you the money. Of course, your CPA will help you with that. And of course, the bank will also, they're going to help you do the diligence that you need to make sure that the practice is valued appropriately. But make sure you do that. Just because something's in a good location or seems like the ideal practice, you need to make sure you're not, of course, overpaying and not be able to meet all of your overhead, including paying yourself. I've already harped enough on how essential it is to have a CPA and an attorney. I was going to say what to watch out for too is hiring an attorney who is not dental specific. This happens to me all the time on a daily basis because, of course, many attorneys are wise in the handling of business transitions, but dental transitions are a lot different. There's a few points that are dental specific, even within like the diligence that a bank will need or the type of documents that they'll need before you close are often different than you would need in a normal business transition. And so making sure you're working with a dental specific attorney is really, really helpful to keep the thing moving and not overpaying in legal fees because they already know all of these kind of basic things. Also, let's see, my last point with that, if you don't have a broker, so is the transition done a lot and you don't want to create a legal or business mess, which brokers do. So dental specific attorney, dental specific accountant, if you can, a regular accountant will likely be just fine too. But those are things I would absolutely get if there's no broker involved. And that's really all I have. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for enlightening us with that, your experience, your knowledge on the subject. And we will be getting to some questions after we hear from two more buyers. Both happen to be located in Alabama, and I believe they're actually very nearby to each other. But first, we'll hear from Dr. Andrew Klingen. Tell us about what your experience was like buying without a broker.
Yeah, for sure. Can everybody hear me okay? I just went through a move and I had quite an issue getting my mic set back up. Are we good?
We got you.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Yeah. So I guess it's helpful to know a little bit about my background. Private practice owner here in Birmingham, Alabama. I'm also a 2023 grad. So went straight from graduating dental school into practice ownership, which is probably something you don't see a lot these days. And honestly, probably not super recommended the majority of the time. And it worked out for me, not because I'm a super impressive individual or a over the top great clinician or anything like that. It worked well for me because I knew what to look for in finding and buying and acquiring a dental practice. And part of that is my background is that throughout dental school, I interned and worked for a dental coaching consulting company called Shared Practices. If you listen to dental podcasts, you've probably heard the Shared Practices podcast before. Well, what started out as a dental podcast over a number of years kind of morphed and turned into a coaching and consulting company, and also a company that helps young doctors, whether it's dental students, associates, get into practice ownership because we feel like the juice is worth the squeeze being a practice owner. Quite honestly, private practice is far from dead. So yeah, I was this dental student who had this really great opportunity to work for an intern for this company who helps dentists find and acquire and coaches them on private practice ownership every single day. And so that's kind of the background I had. It allowed me to have the knowledge to, when I had an opportunity come in front of me that was a good opportunity for growth in a practice, I was able to recognize it and say yes and go, hey, yeah, I'm a new grad. Clinically, this is going to be tough. Like, let's just be honest. Everybody's first few months out of dental school is, not the most talented years as a clinician, but knew what I was getting myself into, and things have turned out well. And I think the whole point maybe of this webinar, what we're getting at is not that you don't need help when you're buying a practice. It's that realizing who's on your team. If you're buying without a broker, I think the base level thing we need to realize quite often is who the broker works for. And that's not you. Most often the broker's sole job is to sell a practice as quickly as they can, right? And that's also why too, you'll find on brokers listings, you look and look and look, you see a lot of op practices, smaller stuff like that, because they know that ones that are bigger group practices that want to sell, they can offload those to larger corporations a lot faster than they can private buyers. Now, that doesn't always exist that way, but it's definitely there. So I think the whole point of this webinar is not that, hey, you can DIY yourself as this is a dentist, because let's be honest, you don't learn this stuff in dental school. I think the point of this webinar is you need to get people on your side. You've heard it mentioned several times, dental attorneys, dental accountants. Our big thing that we kind of talk about at Shared Practices is acquiring and looking at practices from an analytical approach. So a lot of times when we look at a practice, yes, we're looking at the P&L. Yes, we're obviously having the right purchase agreements and legal documents drafted up, but we're also really interested in the analytics behind what makes a dental practice tick and operate and grow and thrive. Numbers like, what's the active patient count? Of those active patients, how many of them, what's the retention look like? You know, does somebody have, is it a single doctor with maybe 1,800 active patients and they're only reappointing 60% of the time? Well, as a new doctor who comes into that practice, it's pretty easy to get your patients to leave with their next hygiene appointment. And before you know it, you're growing your practice's revenue just by reappointing patients. So we look at stuff like that. We look at how well the doctor's performing versus the hygiene department. What's the breakdown there? Do we have a super producer doctor who's doing aligners and implants and molar endo and all of that? Or do we have someone who's just doing bread and butter dentistry, right? That anybody can come in, plug and play and do that. So that's the stuff that the background that, we teach people a lot when buying practices. And it's what I took into when I had this opportunity in front of me, even with having this opportunity to help be on a team that coaches dentists through these things. My plan was not to buy straight out of school, because I knew it's an uphill battle, right? Like, it's pretty tough, but I always told myself, hey, if the right opportunity came, we'd be more than happy to take it. And yeah, about a year ago, was shown a private practice guy who'd been staple in his community for a long time and practicing for a very long time, was ready to retire. And so went and looked. It was quite honestly a very outdated practice, still using paper charts and film. But just looking at the schedule, I saw that there was maybe a little bit more than met the eye to this practice. So when we pulled a lot of the formal reports, we saw that, hey, this practice had the patient flow. It had a lot of patients. The hygiene percentage relative to doctor production was high, meaning that doctor maybe wasn't diagnosing and producing dentistry as much as someone else would on that same patient base. We looked at things like the demographics in the area, right? Like, what's the dentist to population ratio within these 3 to 4, square mile radius, or a 15-minute driving radius or whatnot. We looked at things like, what's the perio percentage? Like, how many people are getting periodontal treatment, right? That whole spill, along with the financials. Like, the financials are definitely important, but we looked at all that. We saw that, hey, this is a practice that we feel pretty confident even a new grad can come in and, one, keep up with the level of production and even grow it some right off the bat. So it's probably worth mentioning that how I found this practice. I did the mailer thing. I sent out mailers to dentists, met some interesting people from that process, but ultimately none were practices I was interested in buying. But this practice was shown to me by a local dental supply rep, one that I'd formed a relationship with in dental school. He knew what my long-term plans were. And he just came to me one day and said, hey, Andrew, I have a practice you should look at. And I was like, hey, this is kind of fast, but I'll look at it. One thing led to another, and met this dentist, found out that it was a really good fit for he and I personally. And we had it, we worked out the deal. I did have people behind me helping me go, hey, here's what the numbers shake out for a evaluation on this thing. It's not just some magical number that we put on this, like, here's what the numbers dictate, right? I had that support behind me because the company I work for, we offer those services to dentists. So I had that help that I'm talking about. I wasn't just DIYing this and doing it on my own. But the relationship I had with this dentist was a face-to-face relationship. I wasn't having interference run on by a broker. I wasn't having the broker feed me numbers that only they wanted me to see, right? This guy was very cooperative and helpful and gave us the reports we asked for. And we saw that this was a good practice buy. It was going to be a lot of work, but it had a lot of opportunity. And then what came after that was I met a guy that, quite frankly, I really got along with, and it was easy to make the deal come together. But I still had the proper dental attorneys, financial people, due diligence and acquisition people on my side, helping me, advising me. Because even though I had seen and done these deals before and looked at a lot of P&Ls, it's easy when it's your life and your situation to put on the rose-colored glasses and see a practice that maybe you're excited and you see what it could be, but not maybe what it objectively is at the moment. So I'm a huge advocate for that, even though I think it's really great to go outside and find an off-market practice, one that's not being listed with a broker for a lot of reasons. But I still think it's really important to have the right people on your side, helping you, advising you, helping protect you. Because I think dentists sometimes are used to being really smart people, and sometimes we get fooled into thinking we can do it all, when in reality, like, you can't be great at everything. You need people with different strengths and knowledge and background than yourself. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell. 7 months in now to practice ownership. Things are going well. It has been far from easy at this point, but we've grown the practice. It's headed in the direction that I ultimately want to see it go in one day. And yeah, I think the juice has been worth the squeeze thus far, and happy I've bought a practice early in my career. Happy I did it off market. And yeah, so this is the kind of stuff that I fully, I believe in. I think that, yeah, practice ownership is very much alive, and that dentists can be empowered to run profitable private practices that achieve their long-term goals and visions, and that you don't have to settle for what's just on the broker websites. You can get creative and find these practices out there.
Excellent point. Thank you for your contributions there. That's a great point about forging relationship with dental supply reps, people thinking outside the box to try and find the right opportunity. We've got one more speaker who is another buyer in Alabama, located in Rossbridge, Alabama, who also decided to buy a practice. She bought her practice in the middle of the pandemic. So I'm sure she had maybe a unique experience, but I will let her go ahead and take it away.
Hi, I am Delaney Spalding, and I happen to be the daughter of Bridget Jorgensen, who is the first speaker. And she is ultimately the reason I became a dentist, and now I'm a practice owner. I really had no intention of really owning a practice going through dental school. I was someone that said, I'll just figure it out. I don't really think I want to own a business because I don't know how to own a business. And what I found out pretty quickly was, graduating dental school, I was not a good employee. So I worked at a DSO. I worked at a private practice here locally. And I just realized that I did not like not being in control of things. So the pandemic made things somewhat easy, somewhat complicated, just because it put everyone's life on hold and everyone had to figure out kind of what next steps were. I was actually volunteering a little bit at the dental school around here because I was thinking maybe I can go and teach, and maybe that's something that I want to do that is going to give me a little break from private practice being an associate. I was thinking maybe I can go into a residency. The pediatric residency might be fun. And then my third option was, what if I wanted to buy a practice, and what would the steps even be? And I think a lot of people that are a few years out of dental school, it is amazing to buy one immediately out. I'm so proud of you, Andrew. But it's difficult, and I feel like you get really jaded when you've been out a few years and you're trying to figure out, is this what I've committed my life to for the rest of my life? If you weren't thinking about being a dental practice owner until you've kind of seen what it's like to be an employee. So my husband and I started watching the 30-day dental MBA on YouTube from Howard Fran, and it was enlightening and interesting, and it was just something fun to do. And it got us interested in practice ownership, but just like everyone else, did not know where you would even buy a practice, because I was not in touch with any brokers or anything, because I was just sitting at home because it was the middle of the pandemic. I looked on our local dental society page to see what offices were for sale. I went and looked at a few of them, and they all just needed too much work. And I didn't even know where to start. Like I said, I did not know that I wanted to own a practice, didn't know what would be involved in it. And I definitely didn't want to buy something and have to immediately remodel it. But plenty of people do that. It's just not something I was interested in. My mom knew I was getting frustrated just with looking at all these practices. So she went on to a local dental Facebook group for my location. She's located in Georgia, but because I wanted to remain slightly anonymous, and anonymous posting was not a thing on Facebook, She created a post in an Alabama Facebook group saying, I think I'm moving to the area and I want to buy a practice. Is anyone selling? She was not moving, but she had someone message her and she immediately sent that message to me. And now I own my practice. It was quick. She had that message. She sent it over to me. I saw the practice that day. I showed up and she was interested in never practicing again. She wanted to walk out the door, wanted COVID to be the end of her career. She wanted to stay home with kids, and I completely understand that. And it went quick. I saw the practice for the first time on April 30th. I stepped foot in the door on May 18th in order to open the practice back up and start seeing the flood of patients that came in after the office had been closed for 3 months. Then I bought it on June 19th. So I had about a month of due diligence and figuring everything out, all while staying completely in the dark. We didn't want the employees to know. We didn't want the patients to know. And that was really difficult. Working in a practice, trying to do due diligence, trying to somewhat make changes in a practice that you're trying to buy, but not really having any authority to do so because you're just this random person who's there. I had a really unique buying experience and it was clunky, but it was without a broker. I was working directly with the seller and we figured everything out ourselves. I did have a dental specific CPA. I had a lawyer, wasn't super fond of him. The seller wanted me to write the contract for sale and that was fine. I ended up writing it through him and it was okay. My biggest issue with the entire sale was using a real estate broker. Because at the end of the day, they are still a broker. They might say they're advocating for you. They are still going to get paid. The way that mine got paid, he approached me, and he is very well known in our area for being a real estate broker. He is slightly newer. And he approached me and said that he wanted to get me a better deal than what the previous doctor had gotten with the landlord. And I said, if I'm not paying you, I kind of see it as, why would I not take someone up on this? So he did. He negotiated on my behalf. And at the very end of all the negotiations, I was given a deal and said, this is what you're going to be paying. And it was slightly less than what the previous doctor had. And I said, great. The day that my first rent check was due, I was told it was about $400 short. Because triple net wasn't included in it. And ultimately, I am paying about, I think, $20,000 over the course of my lease due to the ineptitude of using a real estate broker. So people have good stories with real estate brokers. At the end of the day, it is still a middleman, still someone getting in the way and trying to make money off of a deal getting made when I could have spoken directly with the landlord. And ideally, I would have just continued her lease. And that was an option on the table. And I'm paying for it over the course of my lease for that entire time. But yeah, she doesn't work there. She's now a patient. She comes in with her family and I love the practice. I bought it at a very low producing hobby-like practice and we're on track to do over $1 million this year. So it's been a really cool baby project that I've had. And then I have been lucky enough to have 2 babies in the last 3 years to also take care of. So I'm just really busy and really tired. Yeah, I see we have a ton of questions. So we could probably get to them, whoever.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and get started on the Q&A portion. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. We'll go ahead and go to that first question. I'll show it on the screen here. I'm going to direct this towards Dr. Bridget. Dr. Sandhya Pal asked, how can a buyer incentivize the seller to deliver the practice and be vested in the buyer's success? Well, what do you think about that as someone that was on the selling side?
I don't know. I mean, there wasn't any, I don't know. I wanted her. I had been dealing with for 20 years. So, when she started with us, I immediately went down in days. She for 3 days and I took over 2 and I fed her as many patients as I could. She got all of the new patients. When people would come in, like our whole staff got to know her and was so happy that she was coming in with fresh eyes and excitement. I think we all talked her up, and our patients just felt that we loved her and we wanted to take practice. So I don't know, it worked out really well.
Gotcha. So that was a great way to smooth the transition there. We do have a question directly for Dr. Keon. I'll put that up here. Dr. Keon mentioned that he evaluated the fee for the practice with an accountant. What formula or parameters did you use? Could you enlighten us on that?
Yeah. So I think Andrew made this point, and I thought this something I wanted to also hit on. If someone came to me and was like, "Hey, I evaluated your house. It's worth $1 million, and I am certified to evaluate houses. It is definitely worth $1 million." And in my brain, my house is now worth $1 million. I mean, it just is. I mean, there's nothing. Or you come to me and tell me my car is worth $100,000, and you just give me an official piece of paper and it says that your car is worth $100,000. I'm going to believe that. And I'm not going to sell that car for anything less than that, because in my head now it's worth that much. And I think that's what happens with dental brokers a lot of times. I mean, some of the practices I've seen are like, ridiculously overpriced. They sit on the market for like 10 years and no one ever buys them. And like, no one is talking about why that's a problem. But as far as evaluating practices, look, I didn't use, there's no, like, I don't think there's like a metrics out there. I mean, there's so many things you want to look at. It's hard to look at the futures on anything, on any type of investment. Things that I looked at were exactly what I think it was Andrew was talking about. We looked at the hygiene. I sat down and looked at everything with my accountant, and look. Ironically, I also did the 30-day dental MBA from Howard Fran, and he is a madman, but he's also like super awesome. Highly recommend it. It's the best $100.
I did it as well. It's a great foundation.
It's a great drinking game also.
Yeah, he's crazy. He's crazy, but he's a legend. So looked at things that was the dentist, like for example, he did a lot of Invisalign braces. I didn't do any braces. And I just told him, I was like, I'm not counting I'm not going to do braces. I don't do braces and I don't plan on doing it. So I'm not going to count that as part of your collections. And it was just little things like that. We looked at, how many days was he working? How many hours was he working? What did the hygiene look like? How healthy was the hygiene? How healthy was the recall? Ratios that my accountant provided to see like where if he was on track. And he actually was not on track in a lot of areas. And so we thought that those areas were areas we can easily improve on. So when we looked at the pricing, I mean, I'll be honest with you, almost every practice I see that is evaluated, depending on the region, it's typically somewhere between like 65 and 75% of collections, like last couple of years collections. Like they'll sit there and put all these like numbers together and to justify why. And it's literally like somehow always in that range. I don't think it's rocket science. And if you take out the 10% that the broker would otherwise get, I think, now you're talking, now you can kind of start putting things together. You say, hey, look, if we got a broker, they would take 10%. So let's just take 10% off the top, since we're not doing that. And, you just start kind of negotiating. And so, as far as, and another thing is someone to lean on, no pun intended, is a bank. We had 3 banks. We went with a regional bank and then 2 large banking companies. The regional bank was kind of like my kind of just a local bank. But I literally went to the bank and I was like, hey, here are 3 practices. And like, how much would you loan me for them? And they literally within like an hour were like, we would loan this much. They didn't need an appraisal. They didn't need the practice evaluation. They were just like, this is how much this is how much we would give you for this practice. I mean, they already, like I said, you don't need an appraisal. You can say whatever number you want. If the bank's not going to loan you that money, it doesn't really matter unless you have a bunch of cash sitting around. So as far as like how did we evaluate it? Just looked at the practice, looked at the numbers, looked at how much the dentist was taking home, basically went off of that and then went to negotiate to get a good deal. And like someone else had mentioned, the guy was a really cool guy. We got along. He invited me over for karaoke for like a year after I bought his practice. So, he's cool. So that's kind of how we did. I don't really have a specific metrics. I put some numbers together. I found that this notepad that I had used to like justify the price, and I can't even understand what I was trying to say at the time. So honestly, like a practice is worth like what Miss Master said. A practice is worth whatever someone will pay for it. So I don't think there's some like magic number. There's no true value of a practice. It's just literally like you're buying dental equipment and goodwill, and it's not land.
If I
it's not
could just
anything else.
interject, one thing, the question that was asked before, kind of along what you guys are hitting at, but like it sounds like everyone's transition was pretty good. But like one of the critical things to have when you don't know what the seller and your relationship's going to be like after you start, it may go south really bad. And like having a good contract really helps the buyer. So that's why like a dental attorney is like critical. Like if I've had a number of friends that had really bad transitions and they literally had to like fire the seller, sometimes like, you know, write up a nasty letter to the seller about slandering him, you know, the buyer to like new patients. There's a lot of egos involved when you like sell a practice. And while I was fortunate to have somebody gracious and it was a nice handoff, I've seen it not go well. And so you need to have that in the contract. Like, how does that get managed if the seller's not, you know, on the up and up, you know, after the contract signed?
A good contract protects all parties.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, that's what you need, and 100% agree. We actually decided not to keep the dentist on. We planned on making a lot of changes, and just in a very quick discussion with him, I didn't think he would be open to those changes. And so basically, we're just like, we just want to, you know, sell and walk away, and that in our just becoming, you know, getting to know the guy and everything, and just realized that would be a better situation for our specific situation.
And
for what it's worth, I always think it's better to do a clean break. It usually causes more problems than not to keep someone on.
It's a lot of work. I'm doing it right now.
And Mrs. Masters, while we've got you, Chandler Poole asked if is a letter of intent and a non-disclosure required for every acquisition, or is more of a guideline? When would you provide those in the process?
Yeah, it's not required in everyone. LOIs actually can be bad things. Typically, they're non-binding, but if you put, and this will vary by state, but if you put too many terms in an LOI, it can look like a real agreement, and you might start doing diligence and decide you don't want to buy the practice, but you've signed this LOI. There's been a lot of litigation over that over the years. So if you do an LOI, be really careful not to put too many terms, keep it really general, just that you're interested in buying the practice. And then an NDA is going to totally be up to the seller. I'm not sure if you're asking this as a seller or a buyer, but it's a good idea for a dental practice to ask for one. I don't see it that commonly done in these types of private transactions. Brokers will always ask for an NDA, pretty much always. In the private realm of things, it's not as common. It is a good idea as a seller to protect your interests with that, though.
Gotcha. And we've got a question that I'd like to direct to Dr. Klingen here. It's a bit of a mouthful, but they recommended that they're wondering if you would recommend doing a demographic study when you're looking for a practice. This person's lived in the city for 5 years, associated multiple offices. They know the population, insurance, and procedures done in most of the areas. So they're wondering if they should go with a demographic study. Did you do that when you were looking for a practice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think it depends on what style of practice you're doing. You know, if you're going and doing a startup, absolutely. I think it's icing on the cake when you're doing an acquisition, because in an acquisition, most of the time you're buying that goodwill and patient base. You're not interested in whatever equipment they have. That can be nice, but you know, in my situation, I saw a practice that had a lot of bodies in it, and I knew that was patient flow, and that was at bats for diagnosis and treatment acceptance and hygiene, so on and so forth. That led to production on my book. I still did demographic as well. There's a great tool out there called Denographics. It's a site that you can get a monthly subscription to. And it's super low cost, like $50 a month, and it can give you some of these initial numbers. And so for me, I was able to see that, yeah, my practice, that even though I was located in a large metro, Alabama really doesn't have large metros, but we're in the large metro. Even though I was in that bigger city, that I was in a bit of a pocket of opportunity within a few square miles. And so for my acquisition, that was icing on the cake, because I knew what I was interested in was more so the patient flow he already had. But it was just, yeah, the more information you know, the better. And, can be, if you're trying to grow one day, maybe how much you're going to have to fight for new patients and marketing costs and all that. So yeah, my recommendation is just Denographics. It's a monthly subscription. If you find an opportunity you're really psyched and serious about, you can get more in-depth, studies from them or other companies. But I think that's just a great way. And then the other thing I've always done too is I think it's good to go to the Department of Transportation for your state and see whatever road you're on, if there's a traffic count for that road, and see how many cars are driving by that place every day. Because that was a plus for my office, was that it's in a population and dentist ratio is high. It's in a highly residential area. But the road I'm on is a little less traffic, still decent, so trade-offs everywhere. And I just think, the more information you can have, the better.
There's also city-data.com. It gives you like all the zip codes, like it's all free. It's free data, but you can see if an area is growing, what the average household income is. Gives you a good idea, especially if you're not from the area and you're looking at a practice that maybe is not close to you, like you're trying to buy something from far away. It just gives you a good idea, like what the makeup of the area is, if you're just looking for a quick, cheap way to get an idea.
Gotcha. And I've added that website into the comments so you guys can go and check it out. I think we've got time for one more question. We've ran a little bit over. I'm going to direct this to our founder, Dr. Bridget Jorgensen. This person was asking, how would an out-of-network dentist that cannot carry an associate sell a practice, should they just sign up for PPO to get busier? I believe your practice was out-of-network, still is. Is that correct?
Yes. So we're an out-of-network practice. Then would be around. But I think there's always a market for always, and some people say it's less market because they're coming to see just the dentist. I would disagree with that. I think they're coming for the whole package. We offer different stuff than maybe a PPO office would, but they weren't coming to see me. They were coming because we had great hours and we had childcare, and we offered Botox, and we did all kinds of cool stuff. So out of network is current in any way. Do not sign up for PPOs. You'll have a lot easier time selling practice out of network.
If I may interject, I'm currently bringing on an associate as an out-of-network dentist, and you just have to decrease what you're doing. You have to give an associate or someone that you're trying to sell the practice to an opportunity to actually produce. So you have to be willing to step down a little bit.
Gotcha. Now, before we wrap things up, I just want to pose a question to the entire panel here. Is there any final tidbit of advice, anything that you would say for someone looking to buy, sell a practice without a broker? Anything you can say before we close out this webinar?
I would just say make sure you have your team. Have your dental CPA and your lawyer, and establish a relationship with the bank. Like figure out, because that was the biggest holdup for me, was like the banks just tear through your finances like up and down. It was painful. Like they want to know where every nickel and dime was, and like not that you have to have a lot of like savings because we all had debt coming out of school, but I underestimated how much I had to switch banks 2 weeks before closing because the other bank was still dragging their feet after 2 months. And so those would be the three things: have a bank that what they're comfortable loaning, a CPA, and a good lawyer.
I do think a bank that has like practice or like when you're
I think your microphone might not be working. Might be on my end, but
what I got out of it, I think she said the bigger banks like PNC and Bank of America, most of those have dental branches, or they have a group assigned to just dentists, and they're probably a better resource. I found with local banks, unless you have like a banker that and you have like a direct contact person, I found that local banks really drag their feet with loaning these $1 million practices.
If you have a contact in a local bank, they're going to get it through really quick. I have a ton of great perks with a local bank that I would have never gotten with a big bank. But I think there's a flip side both ways.
When it comes to banking, we had 3 banks, and one was a local bank, and it turns out the 2 big banks, Wells Fargo and Bank of America, were like, they knew each other's. I mean, they came in with the exact same rate, everything. And so we went to the local bank, and they're like, "Can you beat this?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure." And literally, they sent me this email like, "We'll beat it by a point, at least by a point." And so I just took that email and I just forwarded it to Bank of America and Wells Fargo. I was like, "Hey guys, like, if you can't beat this, then I don't see any reason to keep talking." And they both came back with like 2% lower, just because I had this like one email from some random banker who's like 25 years old, who was like, "Yeah, we'll beat it for sure." And so, I mean, sometimes it's fun just to play games, but we ended up going with Wells Fargo, and they gave us a great rate.
Yeah. I think one final topic I would offer, aside from banking and stuff, is I think when you're buying a practice, this is your life and your baby. And I think it, even though this sounds kind of woo-woo and, like a pep talk, I think it's really important for a dentist to sit down and go, "Hey, what's the vision for my life and for my practice style?" Because it's easy to look at someone else and go, "Oh, they have the practice that's grossing $4 million a year with 2 associates," and go, "I want that." Well, do you like managing 20 employees? Maybe not, right? Or it's easy to look at the high producer and go, "Oh, I want to be the super producer and all that." Well, do you like all that clinical stress, right? So I think it's just really important for people who want to buy a practice to take stock of their situation and, to the best of their ability, go, "Hey, what do I want out of this? What do I want in life?" And find a practice that meets that for them. Because, hey, if I, if I want to try to grow to a large practice or something like that, and I buy a small boutique practice or something, I'm gonna have a long road to get there. Or if, I'm an introvert and I buy a 2-3 doctor practice and I have 10 assistants that show up and answer to me, like, that's not fun either. So I think that can be really important and can move the needle a long way for docs.
Okay. Well, with that being said, I first of all want to thank very much our panel for joining us today. We went a little bit over time, so I appreciate their time for just saying what their experience was. I think that really helps a lot of people that are new to the process and they want to hear from real people that did it. So thank you for your input. We'd love to have you back for future webinars we may do on different topics. I would close in saying that the reason that this Facebook group began 3 years ago, it was to try and connect private practice interested doctors and students. And that's been the main purpose of it from the start. We're trying to do things without brokers, without recruiters, stuff like that. That's why we did start PracticeMatchmaker.com's member website. Oftentimes the hardest hurdle is actually finding the opportunity, whether that's a practice to buy, sell, hire an associate. So what we did is we categorized every single post, every listing made into the Facebook group. They're all transferred over to our state organized website. So if you want to check it out, please become a member at PracticeMatchmaker.com. We think you'll find that there's probably a pretty good listing for you in there. Thank you so much to our team. We will have this recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel, the Facebook group, as well as the member website, so you can look back and reflect on it. And with that, I will wish you all a very good night. Thank you.
Good night.